Hello, and welcome to a new webinar from Broadleaf Books, Centering Women's Health, Caring Better for Our Bodies and Our Minds. I'm your host, Lisa Kloskin. I'm the editorial director at Broadleaf Books, and we are just thrilled to have you joining us along with a really impressive group of experts in health and wellness, a group of women that we've gathered together today. We will be dividing the conversation into two parts. In this first part, we'll discuss systemic challenges in women's health and strategies for advocacy and boundary setting. And I'm excited to welcome our first guest, who is Rebecca Bloom. Rebecca is the author of When Women Get Sick, an empowering approach for getting the support you need. Rebecca is a graduate of Yale College and the New York University School of Law. She's a former workplace and benefits attorney. She has served at Bay Area Cancer Connections for over 26 years as a patient advocate and healthcare insurance and workplace advisor for women who are facing breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Rebecca was a contributing writer to and an editor of the book Breast Cancer in the Workplace, and she regularly speaks at conferences and organizations on supporting women as they navigate their health journeys. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's good to see you, Rebecca. Thanks for being here.
Great to see you, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Joining us next is Leah Marone. She's the author of Serial Fixer, Break Free from the Habit of Solving Other People's Problems. Leah is a psychotherapist, a keynote speaker, a mental wellness consultant, a former D1 athlete, and a recovering perfectionist. She has more than 2 decades of experience working therapeutically with individuals, as well as collaborating with companies, nonprofits, and schools to address issues such as anxiety, stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue. She's a regular contributor to Psychology Today and an expert voice for Newsweek and The Atlantic. She shares insights on navigating mental health challenges, setting healthy boundaries, and building resilience. And she lives in Kankakee, North Carolina. Thanks for being here, Leah.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, for our first part, our third panelist is Dr. Monique Rainford. She's the author of Pregnant While Black, Advancing Justice for Maternal Health in America. Monique Rainford is a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist with over 20 years experience. She's an award-winning graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard Medical School, and the Yale School of Management. And she's currently an assistant professor at Yale Medicine. Her writing about maternal and other health disparities experienced by Black women has been featured in multiple publications, including Afro, Elephant Journal, and the Hartford Courant. And her broader work related to women's health and wellness has been featured in the South Florida Times, the Baltimore Sun, Thought Catalog, and the Journal of Reproductive Medicine. And she lives in Connecticut. So thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to be talking to the three of you who maybe on the face of it are working in really different areas of mental health, women's health, supporting women, but I think there's a lot of overlap between what you do. So we'll see where the conversation leads us today. But just to start, by way of introduction, I'd like to invite each of you to just describe your work for us, give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are and what you do in the world. And then perhaps if you could comment about how you see your work intersecting with the topic of women's health. And I'll go to you first, Dr. Rainford.
Wow. First, Lisa. Okay. So yes, as you said, I've been an obstetrician and gynecologist for many years. I hold a title of assistant professor and I do some clinical work with Yale University. I also co-founded a startup, Enrich Health. Our mission is actually to eliminate disparities in maternal health. And it's really building on the work I've done before. And of course, as you know, I write sometimes and public speak and do that kind of work as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Rebecca, would you share a little bit next?
Sure. I'm a listener, I'm a learner, I'm a navigator, I'm a friend, and I'm an advocate. That's what I do for women's health. I use my legal background and all the pretty esoteric things I learned to help women get through what is really a difficult labyrinth. And that's how this all fits together.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you both for the incredible work that you do.
Absolutely.
Me too.
Leah, could you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Sure, sure. I think, as it relates to women's health, women are just amazing space creators and create so much space for everyone else. And I think just historically, we've always, operated in groupthink, and really allow and kind of move into the needs and wants of others to structure us, and often kind of remove ourselves from that recipe. So I think a lot of what I'm writing about, what I'm doing in my clinical work, what I'm speaking about is kind of, not just the good old self-care talk, but how we actually can really get to the deeper psychological components that get in the way of consistent self-awareness and care, and remove kind of that tendency for women to burn out and feel isolated and disconnected.
Great. Great. Well, thank all three of you for telling us a little bit more about how you see your work impacting women and women's health. There is a lot facing women right now, a lot of challenges, potentially a lot of opportunity as well. But I wonder if you might each take a moment to just share what you think. It's probably hard to pick just one, but what you think is maybe one or the top issues that are facing women today, particularly around women's health. Where are you focusing your attention, and what are you most concerned about, or what are you thinking about? Whoever wants to jump in first is more than welcome to.
I'll jump in. For me, it's about access to care, most especially. And once you get access to care, it's about being heard. It's about really creating partnerships with doctors and other care providers to make women's health journeys better. And that's what I would say I focus on the most.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really helping women with kind of, again, that cyclical cycle of just overextending, and kind of prematurely accommodating and fixing and finding ourselves in roles where it doesn't allow kind of people to keep ownership of their own hurdles and issues. I think we feel this need because of our high levels of empathy and I think EQ, that we prematurely will jump in and will fix and will solve and, kind of take false ownership of things that aren't necessarily ours. And so I'm really trying to reframe and create awareness around how we show up to exchanges, relationships, and conversations, and how that very thing might be, really kind of creating this kind of perpetual exhaustion.
Yeah, really important. And how about you, Monique?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say what the most important issue is. It really depends on the life cycle of the woman, what the most important issue is. However, as you know, since I'm focused on maternal health, that's the issue I've chosen to champion. And why this is so important to me, not just being an obstetrician and falling in love with delivering babies, that's why I became an obstetrician, but really knowing that what happens to a woman in her pregnancy and her baby's life in utero and beyond really affects the whole trajectory. So for example, if a baby is born too early or too small, then that can affect the health trajectory, even the financial trajectory of the baby. And for the mom, the illnesses that she might get and the complications that she might get in pregnancy, if she lives, because our mortality rate is way higher than it should be, but if she lives, can set her up for lifelong illness and affect her lifelong health. Not to mention a lot of the PTSD women get from traumatic birth experiences that affect their mental health that Leah speaks about. And so it's kind of all intertwined. And of course, not every woman, for women who never have children, then that won't be their most important thing. But it's just one subset of what I think is really important for women's health.
Yeah, really important. And obviously that's what your work has focused on for decades. You're talking about these sort of overlapping impacts for a woman's life moving forward. But your book also talks about the sort of mutually reinforcing systems of structural racism that are impacting particularly Black women's experience in prenatal and postpartum care. But I imagine those systems are mutually reinforcing in other aspects of the women's healthcare system as well. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about those systems and how you see them working together, and then maybe comment on, what changes you see being made now where there's opportunity to offer improvements for women.
You know, when you talk about the overlapping systems, I'm thinking there's a whole book for that. There's so many different systems because it's so integrated. Obviously, there are biological effects of racism, not genes, but the biological effects on genes and how genes play out. There are social effects in terms of economic disadvantage. There are effects in terms of how care is delivered between implicit and overt biases. There's issues of access Rebecca talked about in terms of even if you have access to a health facility, if that health facility is poor quality, then you're not really in good shape. Because if they miss your diagnosis or they can't give you emergency care that you need, well, you're still in trouble even if you can get to somewhere. So there are so many different overlapping cases. And in terms of like what to target or what can work, I think it's very important that, and I see the women here have championed areas. And I do think it's important to champion an area because if we try to tackle the whole thing, we'll just like, I think, throw up our hands and think, what are we going to do? I think we focus on our area. We look within our area for solutions that have worked and see what we can do to support them. Because I think in every area, people have done stuff that works. It's just that what's missing is not all the support that the initiatives that have worked are not getting the support they need to scale, to be bigger, to apply for more women. So we look at that and try to either integrate them, implement them, and to amplify them so that they can get more support so they can keep on doing the work. That's what I would say. It's hard to, some of the problems are frankly bigger than me, bigger than a lot of us. But can we focus on some of the solutions that are effective and how can we amplify the work of the people who are making change happen and making things better?
I think that's really helpful. It's so easy for us to get overwhelmed by the amount of challenges that are facing women in particular right now. And so having that focus of saying, all right, what's the one area I want to pay attention to now? How can I make a little bit of a difference? And that's making me think, Leah, of your work with serial fixers and sort of helping women decide what is theirs and not theirs, maybe to be managing and thinking about. So I might turn it to you now and ask if you could just define, your book is called Serial Fixer. Could you define who is a serial fixer for us? And then maybe talk about why do you think women fall into that role in particular, and how being a fixer can impact our mental health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and just what I've found, not only clinically, but just, gosh, through my own experience and just in relationships in general, is that, people I think that operate or really try to operate through a very compassionate, empathetic lens, and are really longing for connection and positive relationships. We tend to jump into exchanges and kind of take the bait, if you will, and try immediately to fix and soothe and accommodate and solve. And it's funny because I'm actually in a principal's office right now doing this, and she has a sign that says, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. And it's kind of a direct, like, serial fixer quote, because just this, we have these internal protective parts of us, like the critic, the rescuer, the pleaser, that are constantly sabotaging, when it comes to our self-care, when it comes to we should take a pause, we should back up, this isn't ours, we've identified our role. But these internal, protective parts of us will step in and say, if you don't jump in, if you don't fix this, if you don't create this person, you're probably not a good friend. You're probably not a great parent. You're probably not a great professional, and people around you are probably judging you and thinking you that you're not passionate enough or don't work hard enough. And so we have some internal drivers that we need to set boundaries with, but also externally, I think women, because of our high levels of EQ, emotional intelligence, and this need to accommodate and soothe and have a purpose and connection there, we jump in and almost are in step 5 before we've even identified with the person that has the ownership of what's going on, what step 1 is. And so serial fixer is not only about external boundaries and ones that you can keep, but it's really that internal work too, about our internal protective drivers that tend to sabotage our consistent self-care and kind of, jumping in and immediately fixing and solving rather than supporting.
So that makes me want to ask you then, Leah, when women ourselves, if we're faced with a diagnosis or a challenge where we need to ask others for help, how can we sort of flip that script and become the person who reaches out and says, I need support in this way?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think about things like that seems so, just they're so uncommon. They stir up anxiety, like you don't have, a muscle built around that. I like to view those things, and the way I kind of use this even clinically with patients is you're out of shape with that. Like this is something that you're not in shape with. And so it's uncomfortable. You don't have the repetitions under your belt. And so when we move into this chapter of life that we're like, we're just sidestepping all the critics and the pleasers within us, and we actually legit need support and help, or else we're just going to flounder. Like that is when we kind of, instead of viewing things like an all or nothing, and again, kind of giving into those critical thoughts of, well, you really should be able to handle this, and you're going to put other people out, and kind of the guilt involved. I like to tell people to move out of that all or nothing thinking of yourself getting in shape, and just inviting these micro experiments and micro steps to build those muscles, to actually prove to those protective parts that like nothing catastrophic happened. People are willing to step in. And I think that's where we misstep. We move into this all or nothing thinking, and we label and we kind of give into those associations. And so it's about getting in shape with things. It's having these little asks, these little micro experiments, and acknowledging that people generally want to help us too. And we're kind of ridding them of that source of connection and that willingness to serve as well, if we just are keeping on our own bubble and keeping everything to ourselves and suffering alone.
Yeah. I can see Rebecca nodding along, because I know this is so much what you talk about when women get sick. And one of my favorite parts of your book, Rebecca, is this idea, a piece of advice you offer, that when a woman is facing a serious diagnosis, that she ought to appoint a friend as her sort of chief of staff for that experience, to help manage her care, sort of be the person that she can go to help support her. And that there's a lot of women who would want to step into that role. Well, women or men, I suppose, but I'm imagining another woman stepping into that role, as you have done for so many women. So talk about this idea of appointing someone to support you in this way. And again, how women can work these muscles of practicing, of asking for help and kind of reaching out to our support systems.
Okay, I will. First of all, Leah, I love that metaphor about the muscles, because women have been conditioned all their lives to take care of themselves and everybody else and to please. So how do you get to that place where you have a need state and you need to ask for help? And I love the conception that actually it's an act of generosity. You have shown up for all these people all your life in so many ways. And when you have this moment, it's actually an opening of your heart and your life to invite other people in to help you. So I love that idea. So now let's talk about the chief of staff. Women don't hesitate to get organized and do org charts for everything. Whether it's a company, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's working inside a health system, whatever it is, we have all these committees, we have all these meetings, we have org charts. So I like to say, let's grab that idea and map it over to a women's health journey. And what do you do first? You find your chief of staff, as Lisa said. And, a lot of people ask me, should my partner be my chief of staff? Well, if you're fortunate enough to be partnered and you happen to have one of those partners who is really type A and needs that might be a circumstance under which, sure, that person could serve as chief of staff. But to my mind, that person is chief caregiver and probably has a lot of other needs and issues. And maybe it would be great if you could find somebody else to be a chief of staff. Is it usually a woman? In my experience, yeah, probably it is. And what I talk about in my book is, once you get that person, give that person a whistle and a clipboard and let that person run the show, because the show is complicated. To use another sports metaphor, It's kind of like a fast break. You know, you need to think of who's going to fill those lanes and who's going to do which job. And, you know, this person, this chief of staff, is like project manager for project healing. Now, who else can that person help you recruit? And you would be so surprised how much people want to help. I mean, you wouldn't, because you just said you aren't. but women are, because we're conditioned to think we have to do it ourselves, and we're the ones who carry. As you said, Leah, we make space, right? So that's why that happens. But here's an example. You have a friend who's an accountant or a lawyer. Let that person handle all the paperwork. There's a ton of paperwork. They need a loose leaf and a 3-hole punch, and they need to look at all the deadlines and read all the bills. And some of them are going to be wrong, and some of them are going to need phone calls and interventions and appeals and all the things that happen. That should not be a patient's job to do. Mm-hmm. And if the chief of staff has hired the right person for that, it's going to be done. And people win appeals all the time, by the way. People seldom bring them. That's the real problem. Mm-hmm. So that's how I look at this.
Yeah.
Draft your team, and your chief of staff is like the captain of the team.
I love that. And what a gift that someone who cares about you can give to you, but what a gift you can give to that person too, to allow them to step into the journey with you. So we've talked a little bit about this sort of social conditioning that women have that makes us say, oh, I'm not sure I can ask for help. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I should just carry it all myself. But there's also all sorts of other factors that weigh into our ability to get the help that we need. And Monique, in your book, you talk in particular about Black women avoiding care or delaying getting care because of past trauma. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about the way trauma plays into this conversation, and what can be done to rebuild trust in the systems between Black women in particular in the healthcare system, but for all of us to move past that trauma potentially and get the care we need.
So the problem arises is if you do ask for help and it's met with like, well, you should be able to do that yourself, or why do you need my help, or derision or sarcasm or judgment, then you're not going to want to go there anymore. And it causes you more pain than you didn't even need. Mm-hmm. And in terms of trust in any relationship, I think is the same. If you have a friend and you care about that friend, and that friend meets you with judgment or derision or harshness, then that violates the trust. And so in a care relationship where as a clinician and your patient, clinicians have to be very careful in, I don't want to use that word. We have to be thoughtful in how we deliver care. I don't like careful, thoughtful in how we deliver care, because it is a relationship of trust, and we have to be thoughtful of the needs of our patients. That being said, a lot of our physician workforce and other clinical workforce are burned out. So if you're burned out, you actually do not have the capacity to deliver that empathetic care that you need to deliver. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? So women who are struggling to get the care and the trust they need are not met with the kind of care they need, because sometimes those same female caregivers are so burnt out from doing so much that they don't even have it. And so I think on both sides, patients and clinicians offering some grace, but also if you recognize that it is not a matter of your clinician just doing their best, but they can't do more, but really your clinician being just judgmental or harsh to you, then finding care elsewhere. It can be that your clinician really tries, but it's a hard day. Or it can be that clinician isn't the right person for you and not right. You, for example, in Rebecca's example, if you ask somebody to be chief of staff, they just don't have the bandwidth. They might want to do it, but they don't have the bandwidth. So who's next? You have to find somebody else. But that's hard, because sometimes because of your insurance or where you are, you don't have a lot of choices. So I know that's not a solution exactly. I think it's a complicated problem.
Yeah. A complicated problem that requires complicated solutions that probably require each of us to step up in our own ways.
I'm sorry, Lisa. I was just going to jump in. Monique really made me think about this too. Another way that I think women of color in particular, have trouble in the system is their pain has been so categorically dismissed historically, and they've been seen and treated and labeled as though they're hysterical. And so that combination of things really is a big barrier to just walking in with an open heart and the kind of trust that we're hoping to establish.
Yeah. Rebecca, I wonder if you could say a little bit more. I'm thinking about examples that you tell in your book about the lengths that women have had to go to try and get the care that they need. I'm thinking about an example you shared that a group of women had to form their own LLC to get the right kind of group insurance coverage when it wasn't available elsewhere. We're talking about this system that's not supporting doctors, women doctors very well. It's not supporting patients very well. So what are the steps we can take to find that support that we need?
Yeah, so that example was before the ACA, because since then women are able to get coverage at least. But there's a whole lot of other steps that people take. For example, go to a disease-specific organization, ask them who's on the advisory board. It's usually a doctor who can really advise and help and get you through the system quicker and get you an answer and get you an appointment.
Yeah. I wonder, Monique, if you have more to say about that, kind of what we can do to support one another and build, both from the physician side and the patient side, the support that we need.
The good news is people are establishing organizations to help people know where to go. For example, there's an app, I'll call it Out Earth app, which allows, it's like a rating app for like facilities or healthcare people to say, okay, this place is good. I would say that if patients, women of color, Black women, have found a clinician provider that they love, why not highlight that and share so that can bring more attention and women will know where to go? Why not highlight that? I know there are websites available that try to highlight culturally sensitive clinicians. So I think that part of what we can do is that if we know of people who are doing things well, why don't we amplify them? Why don't we tell more people about them? I actually find the negative happens. I find like people's mistakes, people's failures, that's what's amplified. That's what's goes viral. It seems much quicker than the good stuff. Oh, this person is doing very well. Let's support them. Let's support their work. Let's blow it up there. And I kind of don't find that to be the quickest thing you see in your feed. You see more negative than positive in, say, the social media feed when I say feed. So can we amplify those women? Can we support them, whether by our voice or finances if we can, or any way we can, directing people them? How can we really support them? Sending them kind words, sending them kind thoughts. What can we do to really support the people who are doing the work well so that they can have what they need emotionally, financially, physically to continue doing that work?
I love that. We are almost at the end of our time for part one, but I want to just give you each a chance maybe to say, I'm just hearing so much about how in each of the work that you're doing, the ways that you are just intimately supporting women who come to you in need of help. And so if there's maybe a closing word you might each want to give to maybe a woman who's watching this webinar and thinking, I feel overwhelmed, I'm not sure how to handle all of this. What would you say to her? What's that message that you want her to hear?
I would say, don't go on a health journey alone. You don't need to. There is help available. There are people around you in your life who can really do something useful to make your journey better. So don't go it alone.
What would you say, Leah?
I think I would say, as much as, we think about self-care, as much as, a lot of times we equate that with time that we need to carve out, maybe, money that we need to spend. I would really think of working with what you have. And one thing that we all have dozens of during the day is transitions. We transition from room to room. We transition from roles. We transition from physical locations. And I think so much of us are programmed to feed into this like urgency culture and be productive in every crack and crevice of our day. And so my suggestion is to think about identifying and using even half of these transitions throughout your day and viewing them as almost like micro resets and ways that you can get in shape with being present and kind of clearing the clutter, even if it's for 30 seconds. I mean, I know myself, I had to really condition myself that at every red light, I didn't have to pull out my phone and see if someone texted me or if there was another news update in the last 30 seconds or, just be productive. And I think just taking that moment to look around, to breathe, to use those micro resets as ways that we're proactively managing our self-care rather than letting our internal balloons build up and just pop.
Really great. And how about you, Monique? Final word. What should we say to these women?
Community. Going back to what Rebecca says, we're really not alone in this, even though we feel alone. And remember, community, whether a community of friends, even if your community is through social media, even if it's community is finding Google people like me community, I think there's so many ways that you can access a community. And they may not take care of all their needs, but they may direct you to other communities that can help you. So just looking out there for communities that can help nourish you, build you, advise you where to go. I think community and on our part, try to be supportive when people reach out to us. We may not be able to do everything for them, but can we give them one piece of advice that can direct them to help them in what they do? So really trying to, us as women, supporting each other as women in any way we can, whether it's small or large.
That's great. I wish I could talk about all of this with each of you for so much longer, but that is all the time we have for part one. So just want to say thank each of you for joining us. If those of you who are watching along, if you have any questions about their books, we have shared links in the comments to each of those books, and please engage with us there in the comments, follow up, and we'll be moving on to part 2 of our webinar next. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
So part 2 of our conversation today is another group of fabulous women who are going to share with us the impact that trauma in particular has on women's health and provide some ideas for recovery. So I'm excited to share 3 new panelists, introduce them to you today. So our first panelist for part 2 is Amanda Gregory. She's the author of You Don't Need to Forgive, Trauma Recovery on Your Own Terms. Amanda is a trauma psychotherapist whose work focuses on complex trauma recovery. Her unique perspective as both a clinician and a trauma survivor allows her to genuinely understand the needs of survivors. Her writing has appeared in publications such as Psychology Today, Psychotherapy Networker, and Psychotherapy.net. And with over 17 years of clinical practice, she has provided trauma education and training for the American Counseling Association, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Ronald McDonald House Charities, among others. And she lives in Chicago, Illinois. So welcome, Amanda. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Next is Gigi Renee Hill. She's the author of Storywork, Field Notes on Self-Discovery and Reclaiming Your Narrative. Gigi is an author whose books have helped thousands of people overcome the emotional obstacles keeping them from living fully expressed lives. Her recent releases included 2 guided journals published through Rockridge Press. One is Self-Care Check-In, a guided journal to build healthy habits and devote time to you. And the other is A Year of Self-Reflection, 365 Days of Guided Prompts to Slow Down, Tune In, and Grow. Gigi is a creative coach and founder of the Inner Story Writing Circle, a membership community for writers and creatives seeking guidance, support, and tools for the heart-centered work of writing about their lives. Welcome, Gigi.
Hello, Lisa. Thank you for having me today.
And then our final panelist is Dr. Robin Koslowitz. She's the author of Post-Traumatic Parenting, Break the Cycle, and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Robin has been a licensed child psychologist since 2017 and now houses her practice at the Center for Psychological Growth of New Jersey, which focuses on trauma-informed psychotherapy for children, adolescents, and families. She's the educational director of the Targeted Parenting Institute and host of the popular Post-Traumatic Parenting podcast and YouTube channel. Her work is regularly published in Psychology Today, and she has appeared on Fox, CNN, News Nation, and other national television outlets. She lives in New Jersey, and we're really glad to have you here today as well, Dr. Robin.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Excited to talk about this.
Yeah. So just as we did with part one, I want to invite each of you to sort of introduce yourselves to us, talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in the world and how you see it intersecting with women's health. So Dr. Robin, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Koslowitz. I am the author of Post-Traumatic Parenting, which is all about stopping our damage from damaging our children. The book for me was my own personal journey of being a parent with PTSD and really not finding any resources to help me with that journey. So for me, it's both, that idea of all research is me search. So for me, it's been very much a blend of the personal and the professional, and realizing that it's not only me, that there are so many parents with PTSD out there that need this kind of support, both how did my trauma impact my parenting? And more crucially, what do I do about it now that I have kids and I'm kind of building the parachute in midair?
Yeah. Gigi, would you go next? Tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Gigi Renee Hill, the author of Storywork, Field Notes on Self-Discovery and Reclaiming Your Narrative. And my work really centers writing as a tool for self-discovery, for self-care, for creative courage, healing, personal growth. And my mission really is to empower people to use writing, whether they're writers or not, as a tool for navigating the past, present, and future, and finding meaning in their life experiences that they have the power to shape, right? Through writing, we can find meaning in our painful experiences. We can find a vision for our lives that helps us to overcome experiences that we've had that we may have had a fixed narrative about in the past. It really comes from my own journey, overcoming complex PTSD, not knowing that I was overcoming anything at all until I was well into my 30s, right? Very much thinking that my past had nothing to do with the struggles I was having in the present. And so my journey of using writing and creativity as a tool to get curious about these unwanted patterns that I was seeing in my life led me to discover systems and routines through writing and expression that made everything become more flexible and more moldable. And these fixed narratives that I had that were keeping me in these loops started to loosen up. And I became really passionate about sharing these tools with other women, with other people who are in these storylines that they can't get themselves out of. So that's what Storywork really centers on. And that extends out into my workshops and my work one-on-one with clients as well.
Great. We're all writers in this room, so excited to talk more about that. But Amanda, I'll give you a chance to talk about your work first.
I'm Amanda N. Gregory, author of You Don't Need to Forgive. And just like you, Gigi, I found out that I was a trauma survivor into my 30s. So it's actually more common than people think. And being both a survivor and a clinician, I kept coming up against forgiveness in the recovery process. Is it required? Is it not? So I had devoted years just to figure it out. And spoiler alert, it's not. Forgiveness is always optional. But when we look at trauma, there's so many different types of experiences that women are more likely to experience, which can lead to trauma. And also the treatment, a woman's trauma treatment could look different from a man's. So that's very interesting and kind of how that comes up in the work as well.
Fascinating. I mean, you've all already started talking about this, but the first question I really wanted to dig into as a group is to sort of think about what are the connections between experiences of trauma in particular and women's health more generally. How do these experiences impact the way we move through the world and what our mental and physical health looks like? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in first.
I think for me, the way we conceptualize trauma is very important. And unlike Gigi and Amanda, I knew I had PTSD at a young age, but I really conceptualized trauma as a wound that you heal from, like an experience that you have in the past. And then that experience is then you heal and then you move forward with your life. I didn't realize that really trauma functions so much more like an app where it installs operating systems in our brain and body. And then those operating systems unconsciously take us over. So it's not a past event. It's a present program right now that's impacting me. And I think when you think of it that way, you can really understand why a woman might not engage in the self-care she knows she needs. You know, a woman, particularly for me with post-traumatic parenting, a mom might know I need to get to bed in order to have a centered, healthy day with my kids tomorrow and really be able to self-regulate so I can co-regulate and do all those good things with my kids. And yet she gets that email from her boss really late at night and she responds to it because that trauma app activates and says, you must people please at all costs. And she may have all the knowledge and all the Instagram memes and all the information, but then that trauma app takes over. So for me, it wasn't about not knowing I had trauma. I knew I had PTSD. It was thinking that it was this past event that I had healed from that really interfered with my ability to parent and also with my ability to take care of my own health. So I think once we understand trauma as something that's operating now, even if what actually happened, the precipitating event was 20 years ago, it changes everything.
I'm seeing you nodding, Gigi. I'm thinking about the trauma app that you're also talking about, the sort of narrative that trauma builds into our lives. So I wonder if you could make some connections or talk about how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so often those narratives are so hardwired into us. We're not consciously thinking, oh, I'm doing this because I don't think I'm worthy enough, or I'm doing this because there's something wrong with me and everyone can see it, or it's just there. It's just like in this reactive autopilot mode that we're in. So for me, it showed up as these inner conflicts where I recognized that I was navigating in relationships and career decisions and the way I would show up at work and all these things in a way that was in conflict with my values and what I really felt inside. But I was such on autopilot. I didn't even realize that why I was doing that. I just thought, I just doubled down on because there's something wrong with me, right? There's something off with me that I'm not able to show up in these spaces as this vision or this ideal self that I want to be. And I didn't connect that to that operating system that Robin's referring to that was orchestrating my behavior. I didn't understand the connection between my thoughts and my beliefs that I had developed from my experiences and how they were affecting my actions. So it was just like this constant conflict, and that really messed with my mental health because I felt one of my issues was this underlying belief that I was a bad person, and that came from childhood trauma and just navigating relationship with an undiagnosed mentally ill mom who accused me of things all the time. So I grew up with this narrative that I'm always doing something wrong. There's something wrong with me in this narrative, but I wasn't realizing that I was operating from that narrative. Mm-hmm. So when I would see myself in these situations and doing these things, it just sort of became more like evidence to me. Like, see, there's another example, you know? So I just think that it's so true what Robin is saying is it's this operating system. And through my work, I help people to peel back those layers and say, what meaning are you giving to this? Where are you feeling that tension? Where are you feeling that division between what your values really are, what you really know about yourself, and how you're showing up in the world? And get curious about where you're feeling that tension, that inner conflict. And we start there usually, like, let's just get curious about it and just be open-minded. What else could this mean, or what could this be pointing to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking about those unconscious narratives, those ways that we just sort of automatically move in a certain direction. And it's making me think, Amanda, about your work, sort of untangling our cultural narratives and even sort of therapeutic clinical narratives around forgiveness and what that means. So maybe could you talk to us a little bit about the connection between those? And sorry if you can hear there's a siren going off here, so I'll mute once I finish my question. Elective forgiveness and untangling those narratives and how that impacts the way we can heal from trauma.
And if you look at those narratives, one thing that was brought up earlier was the social conditioning. the social conditioning of women. And we do have data that states that women are more pressured to forgive, more expected to forgive, more encouraged to forgive. I've had colleagues working with women trauma survivors that they will go into a session and recommend forgiveness or bring it up as an option, but then with a male client, they don't. I'm like, well, wait a minute. What's the difference here? So we need to look at that. What is going on with women trauma survivors and certain expectations that might be put on them that may not be put on men? And when we look at forgiveness, it should always be elective, meaning this is something that if it can support your recovery or your way of life in any way, wonderful. Bring it in, embrace it. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And it can change on a dime. It could be, maybe forgiveness is beneficial for one relationship and maybe not for the other. And, when we look at elective forgiveness, we're really also talking about someone's agency and really embracing that. Would you like to pursue forgiveness? Would you not? What if it shows up organically? Does that count? Does that mean that you've forgiven if you didn't work towards it and fill out the workbook and do all this? Well, yeah, it does count. It does, because sometimes it does show up organically. So when we look at women's health, I think it's important to note that, there are some things that we may expect of women that we may not expect of men. How does this show up for women who are members of historically oppressed communities? Because that's different. There's been data that we will ask Black women to publicly express forgiveness, but not white women. What's going on there? We need to be aware of that and how that affects women and trauma survivors.
So Amanda, one of the words that I picked up on in what you just mentioned was this idea of agency. And I'm thinking that I'm hearing a connection between what you're doing, Gigi, with story work, giving people a chance to sort of claim their narrative and claim a sense of agency. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the work that you're doing with story work and how writing about our trauma, writing about our experiences can interrupt those patterns that trauma creates in our relationships, our sense of self, kind of the way we move in the world.
Absolutely. I find that writing is such a healing modality because it allows us to externalize what we're carrying inside, right? So we're able to put it down, take it out of our minds, get it on the page. And there's a magic that happens there. As you all know, you're all writers. We surprise ourselves when we see what we're thinking. And often I've vented or poured my heart on the page and then gone back and looked at it later and saying like, wow, especially when I look at old journal entries, like, look at the things I was saying to myself, like, look at the way I was beating myself up, or look at the assumptions I was making, the little piece of information that I had and just ran with it down this spiral of doom, right? So being able to externalize what we're thinking, what we're feeling is a powerful tool for us to start to process that healing. I find that when we are able to, those conflicts I mentioned, those narratives that feel like there's this distance between how we're living, the things we're saying, the way we're showing up, and the way we want to live, and that creative vision that we have for ourselves, we can start to look at, where did this belief that I have that is disempowering me, where did it start? And sometimes we can't find the original source right away. But when we start to just think of, how has this been illustrated in my life? If I'm showing up in this relationship and I'm letting maybe I'm in a relationship with somebody and they're overpowering me and I'm fawning in this relationship. When did I start fawning? Where did that show up? And maybe we can trace it back and we can find illustrations of it and tell ourselves those stories. There's so many experiences that we've had, particularly with trauma. I know I personally had never told certain stories to myself. I tried to bury them. I just tried to leave it in the past and think that I was healed from that or I was over that. And I had never sat with that inner child part and just let her tell me the story. What happened? How did that make you feel? I'd been through I started therapy in my late 20s, but I needed to have this intimate dialogue with my inner child and these versions of myself that had these traumatic memories and experiences that I told myself, I don't even remember. It's blurry, it's choppy. And then you can start to see how that pattern forms of, and then there was this time when I was a teenager. And then there was this time when I was a young adult. And you start to see different illustrations of those patterns. And so illuminating. And you start to from the point where you are now, be able to look back and say, like, I have this hindsight wisdom now. I have these lessons that I can learn, this wisdom that I can glean from these experiences, and I can assign a different meaning to it. What did I learn about myself and about life and about relationships from these things? Instead of allowing the experience to be something you're ashamed of, embarrassed by, feel guilt about, that's disempowering. That just makes us shrink. But how do these painful experiences maybe empower me? Or how can I find even the beginnings, just open the door a little bit to the idea that maybe this could empower me. Maybe this made me more empathetic. Maybe this is why I'm so able to hold space for people. Maybe this is how I can share my story so someone else doesn't have to feel so alone. So in story work, the idea is to be able to not have this limited narrative that these things happened and that's the end of it. All of these plot points amount to, I'm damaged now. This is just how I am. This is just what it is. To a growth narrative that says, these things happened, but how else can I think about it? Is there something constructive that I can do with this? And I think it's important to say it's not about bypassing. It's not about saying, oh, these things happen. Let me find the silver lining and just put rainbows and butterflies all over it. It's not that. We want to sit with it and acknowledge those parts, but we want to also create the space for, and that's where the creativity comes into it. We have to use our imagination a little bit, right? To think differently, to break out of a fixed way of thinking and get curious and say, how else can I think about this? How can I use this in some type of constructive, positive way in my life now? Well, how can I serve with this? How can I answer this need that I've had that I haven't answered over the years because I didn't know I needed that? There's so many different pathways that we can find that empower us based on our past experiences instead of disempowering us. And so that's the core of story work, is finding something useful that we can do with those memories.
It really sort of flips the whole narrative on its head. And it's making me think, Robin, about something that you say in your book about our past trauma in some ways can be metabolized in a way to become our superpower as parents, or maybe our superpower, as we show up in the world in other ways. So do you see connections there? Could you talk about that a little bit?
I totally see connections there. And I really love what you're saying, Gigi, because this idea of learning from past experience, like painful past experience, is actually how every professional knows that's how we grow, right? The scariest thing you'll ever do in graduate school is live supervision, where you're treating a patient and there's like a whole bunch of people behind one-way glass and your supervisor's in your earbud and they're watching your every move, right? Because you're going to get a ton of feedback about what you did. It's terrifying, right? But that's how you learn and grow. And I think for a lot of post-traumatic parents, we have so much shame when we make a mistake in our parenting. When that morning just did not go anywhere close to our values and our voice got too loud and we said, like, my kids are going to come home and I'm not going to do the thing, whatever the thing is. And then all that happens is the thing, right? And whatever that is. And when you know that it's not you, it's your trauma, something installed an app in your brain and that app took over. Nobody consciously, logically says the best thing to do with a 4-year-old is to like completely lose it at them. Like nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be, completely dissociated and on their phone while their kid is trying to talk to them. There's no parent who's like, yes, that is the logically best plan. I've had a parent. So why did that happen? It happened because your trauma app took over. Right. But it's so counter shaming when you think of it that way, because then you can look at the story like Gigi's saying, and you can say, you can actually benefit from the feedback of like, why did that happen? My kid made that comment and then I lost it. What was it? Maybe I was bullied as a child. And when my teenage daughter made that really hurtful comment, I went back into someone who was bullied as opposed to her mom. And when she rolled her eyes at me and she made that really cutting comment, that trauma app just took over. I did not intend to lose it with her the way I did, right? That was not in accordance with my values. But if I'm just going to not think about it at all because it's too painful, it's too shameful, it's too freezing, it's too terrifying to even think about it. So like, let me just move on with my life and pretend that never happened. I never learn and grow. But if I can say, wait, that was my trauma. Let me learn what set me up for that. What part of me, what aspect of my trauma app took over in that moment in a way that I didn't expect it to? And what do I want to do next time? How do I want to handle that? Like I remember one evening with my kids when they were little, and I had a lot of competing priorities, and they were being very loud, very demanding. And every instruction I gave them was like, wait, is my mouth moving and no sound coming out? Like, what's going on here? And it was just getting frustrating. And I did get louder than I intended to and meaner than I intended to. And then I said, you know what? In those moments, I'm going to sing all of my instructions instead of speaking them. When that happens and I'm feeling this sensation, I sing. I don't have the greatest singing voice. I don't love to sing. It interrupted me so much that I really learned from it, because I was able to sit down and hold up a mirror and say, I didn't like how that went. I'm going to interrupt that next time and understand where it comes from for the future. But you can only do that if you're in a counter shaming moment of, it's not me, it's my trauma. I'm not actually the worst parent in the world. I yelled because my trauma app took over.
So much of this work is about untangling shame. And I see a lot of that in your book as well, Amanda. I'm wondering if you have reactions to this or could say more about how you're seeing that show up with your clients.
Shame is my nemesis. It is, as a trauma clinician, it is, in addition to needing to help the client feel safe, which is a big one. And that could be a big part of treatment and recovery, is to be safe for one, but to also feel safe enough. Because sometimes we know logically that we are safe, but we don't feel safe. So safety is a big, big part. And I think that's something that could at times be more difficult for women, to be in situations where we are safe, but also to feel safe. But once safety is reestablished, then the shame, oh my gosh, it's so pervasive. And I have to tell you, it is very, very rare for me to come across a trauma survivor that does not experience shame. It's very rare. When it happens, it's single event, traditional PTSD, usually no childhood stuff, and treatment can sometimes be rather quick. But when it's more of the complex trauma, the pervasive trauma, the shame is there. And I found it very helpful to give the shame language too. Sometimes we can look at negative core beliefs. You know, what of these beliefs do you actually believe? Now, you know, logically, you know, they're not true, right? You know that, you still believe it. So there's that app disconnection. It's not updating. Some of the most common ones I hear are, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, I'm a failure, you know, things like that. So sometimes to put language to them could be really beneficial. I love the intervention of finding more adaptable, again, updating the app beliefs. They don't need to be positive. They don't. They just need to be more realistic. You know, so if I believe I'm not good enough, then what about believing I'm good enough? Which, if you think of it, is average. You're not perfect. You're not, you know, killing it, going above and beyond. I'm good enough. I'm a decent person. I'm a decent parent. You know, things like that tend to be more accessible, but shame is very, very difficult, but you can also absolutely update that app and overcome it. I've had experiences with women trauma survivors that they never thought they would ever believe they're good enough, or that they have intrinsic value is another one. How is my value not external? How is my value not connected to what I'm doing for other people and holding space for other people? How could that actually be internal and intrinsic? And how can I believe that? It feels so far-fetched, almost like you're considering a foreign language in the beginning, but it is possible to be able to go through the experiences that you need to have these beliefs really come inside of you. When I started my trauma recovery, I believed I didn't matter. And that was my biggest belief, because my parents, unfortunately, showed me that I didn't matter. So I had to really learn in my relationships and updating my app to really believe that, wait a minute, I do matter. I do have value. And that made such a difference.
Such a powerful conversation. I, again, wish that we had more time together, but we're coming close to the end. I want to give each of you a chance, the same offer that I gave to our panelist in part one, to say, for the women who are listening to this webinar, who are feeling overwhelmed, who are feeling like that trauma narrative or that shame narrative is really loud in their ears today, what is that message that you would want to leave them with before we depart?
I'll start. One thing that was really powerful when I got serious about finding alignment between my values and how I really wanted to show up, and the overcoming that autopilot, that the app that we've been referring to throughout the webinar, is to pause, is to slow everything all the way down and just give myself those moments of pause. So when I feel reactive, when I feel that autopilot kicking in, pause and just whatever I need, ask myself what I need, ask myself what's happening here, feel my body. So many of us live so much in our heads and we're so disconnected from our bodies. My body would be giving me all the warning signs, all the red flags, and I did not speak that language until more like later on in life. So pause, tune into your body and what your body is saying that you need. Maybe you need 5 minutes to gather your thoughts. Maybe you need some fresh air, take a walk, whatever you need in that moment, so that you're not so reactive in these situations where that app is kicking in, that operating system is giving you this reaction that you want to start distancing yourself from. So one actionable thing that everyone can do is to take an honest look at your life, and are you allowing yourself time in your days, in your dynamics with relationships? Are you honoring yourself enough to set those boundaries, to pause when you need to and assert yourself and say, I need a minute? And that alone can really start to shift the trend in a different direction.
The power of the pause. I love it. Mm-hmm. What would you say, Robin?
I think that parenting is an extremely unique time to reprogram that app. And like Gigi's saying, this idea of, retelling the narrative, right? Reframing the narrative. I think for a lot of us, this idea, something I say in the book, is about how your inner child can't raise a child. To me, your inner child is just aspects of self, unhealed traumas that are still sort of floating around in your brain. And sometimes they reactivate the trauma app even when you don't want them to. But parenting is this uniquely opportune time to actually heal your inner child. Because first of all, in parenting, we're parented. And second of all, parenting is this uniquely neuroplastic period where neural connections are reorganizing. And that's what we're trying to do with trauma therapy, right? We're trying to take away that automaticity, like Amanda was saying about like, I'm not good enough or I don't matter, right? Those kinds of beliefs. Parenting is the one time that our brain is ready to reprogram itself. So we might as well hop on to that opportune moment because our brain is ready to do it. It's very, very, very hard to rewire your brain. I think anybody who's done trauma therapy knows that, the whole idea of neuroplasticity is really bad news sometimes, because if neurons that fire together wire together, then neurons that fire together all the time weld together. And then we're trying to unweld them. And that's really difficult to do. Parenting happens to give us this moment where we actually can. So rather than looking at it as like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst parent in the world, my kids trigger me, what kind of a parent could be triggered by your kids? Looking at it as, my kids don't trigger me, they reveal my triggers. And I have to reveal it to heal it. So it's revealed right now. So this is this amazing moment. If we get rid of that shame, like Amanda said, it's an enemy, right? We get rid of that shame and we say, ooh, my triggers got really revealed today. Let me go into therapy. Let me journal. Let me think it through, because boy, were they revealed today. And now let me do something about them. It's just so opportune for us that I think rather than having that sense of like, I'm so damaged, I'm going to damage my kids, looking at it as parenting is this gift. It's this moment that I get to actually heal, changes everything.
Really powerful. All right. Last word, Amanda. What would you leave us with?
I would say give yourself permission to find what works for you. There is no panacea here for trauma recovery. If there was, you'd know. We would scream it from the hilltops. This podcast might have been 2 minutes. We just let you know what that is and then be out the door. Everybody here would be out of a job. That's okay. I'll retire early. But there's no panacea. There's no one size fits all. And it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be a combination of experiences, methods, relationships. It's all about what works for you. And you're not going to have the same things that work as your neighbor or your friend or your family member. And that's okay. We are all very, very different. Some methods might work for one person, not for the other, but there's no one method, not forgiveness, not yoga, not medication, not therapy, none of these things. It's just that one thing that's going to work. Sometimes we do need to trust our gut. You might try one thing and it doesn't sync up. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like I can update that app. That's okay. Move on to the other. Keep trying until you find that combination that works. And know this, even the combination changes. I have done some methods at the beginning of my recovery that I don't do anymore because I don't need them. I don't benefit from them. But guess what I did? I brought in other things that might be a little bit more challenging, that might fit my app where it is right now and help me to update even more. And remember, the app never stops updating. Okay, we've never arrived. We don't stop recovering. Your app could need to be updated 2 minutes from now, a day from now, a week from now. That's kind of how we work as human beings. So try not to think that there's like this ultimate end goal and then I'm just done. I'm done updating. No, we keep having to push that little button and constantly updating it.
I feel like that's a perfect way to end this conversation. We're finishing for this moment, but the work is not done. And I know each of you are going to continue to do really important work in the world. So I want to thank the three of you, thank the panelists from part one, remind those who are watching this webinar that information about each of these fabulous authors and their books is in the comments here. And we really hope you'll join us for future conversations. Thank you all for the time.